you, and let me say, because I'm raised a Southern man by my grandparents, that I'm obligated to say, as I've already said on social media, but I want the public to know it, because if you do it in private, you ought to be able to do it in public. I sincerely apologize for the quick judgment and the coarse language that I use that I feel is appropriate at black barbecues, like Steve Harvey said, it's our word now, but I shouldn't have used in criticism of us, because it wasn't at you as much as of us, because my fear and impulse was driven by my ego. And our egos can become our masters. So I'm very sorry, because I jumped to a conclusion and I used coarse language with someone who I admire, I respect, I'm a fan of, and if my grandmother would have lied, would have called me and said, Michael, you're wrong.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. I do appreciate that. And you've been very gracious, Mike, you know, in talking about this. And, you know, and these things can get taken a life of their own, right, because of social media.
Absolutely.
So I do appreciate that. And I feel like the bigger picture here was, I think for both of us, the bigger picture. My criticism of you and the video you did, your criticism of me, really goes back, I think, to the March for Our Lives. And I just wanted, just for your background, give you some background on why I had such a strong reaction to you doing that interview, which of course you did before, and then they posted on that day. The morning that your video was posted, that Coleon Noir is what he calls himself, but his real name is Collins Ayari Idehan. He's a lawyer. The day that they posted that video and that you started trending for that, they also posted like a series of tweets at me. So let's do E6 first. They posted this series of tweets with him tagged in it or him forwarding them that were really like kind of inflammatory, you know, going after David Hogg, going after the Reverend Al, talking about rape is a real thing, saying they only want to hear from black people, agree with them. And then let's play this video. This is E2 for my reporters. That was the one that really got to me that morning. Take a look.
Joy Reid, you can go stick it. We are on to you, and we will be watching. Every time you lay out a ridiculous tweet like that, I will be calling you out. You can bet on it.
Tell them, please, how you feel about you have to deal with the reality of rape and how you don't want to be disarmed dealing with it.
Rape is a real thing. Being mugged is a real thing.
I mean, you know, Mike, for me, when an organization that's all about guns starts tweeting out, we're watching you, I take that as a threat, honestly. Maybe it was because they had already done the hourglass thing. But do you recognize sort of the sense that a lot of us out here have, that the NRA is actually low-key threatening, particularly to people of color?
I think that we have been threatened as people of color since we're brought here. I sat down with Colin not to promote the NRA, but to promote a conversation that's being left out of the national gun conversation. And that conversation is black gun ownership. You know, Frederick Douglass said, and I quote, in 1867, a man's rights rest in three boxes. They rest in the ballot box, the juror's box, and they rest in the cartridge box. And then, to prove himself far more progressive than his time, he said, and no man should be restricted from the ballot box by color and no woman by sex. 100 years later, in 1967, we caught up and got that progressive. And I say that just to say that my original conversation, and the reason I even appeared today, besides that I should apologize for my sister and someone I admire for using coarse language, is this, is to simply say African-American gun ownership in this country has always been used as a defensive mechanism. We've not organized militias and went out and hunted. We've not sought to kill people. We've only sought to do what Ida B. Wells said, and having a Winchester in the home should be an honored place in every black home, defending ourselves against lynchings, torture, murder, brutalization. I'm sorry that an organization like the NRA has sunk to levels of all of us. All of us have become very petty. What I did was petty. It could be argued what other people from the left and right did was petty. I got threats to my life in my DM, so I can imagine what you've got. I'm just here to say to African Americans, the conversation that we need to be having, besides who our enemies are what are the rights that we have that we're going to invoke? Are we going to invite more law enforcement into our life? Because if more gun laws pass in a blanket way, more police are in schools, those police are going to interact with our children more. We've seen in the last 2 years black girls be slammed to the ground by police in classrooms and at pool parties. That's going to increase because our children are, by the narrative of the media, more hostile and aggressive. Black men, you're more